Hello and welcome to the GP Vahan podcast. I am your host, Greg. My guest for this episode is Ara Oshagan. Ara is a diasporic, multi-disciplinary artist, curator, and a cultural worker whose practice explores collective and personal histories of dispossession, legacies of violence, identity, and unimagined futures. He works in photography, film, collage, installation and book art, public art, and monument making. Oshagan has published 3 books of photographs. He is currently an artist in residence at 18th Street Arts Center in Santa Monica and a curator at ReflectSpace Gallery in Glendale, California. Ara, welcome to the show.
Well, welcome. Thank you. Thank you for having me, Greg.
Yeah,
I really
absolutely.
appreciate it. Yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, I was at the Armenian Museum of America a few weeks back at the Artist Talk, where your work, Disrupted Borders, is currently being displayed there. And your work, especially now, really resonates with everything that's going on at Artsakh, Nagorno-Karabakh, Armenia, and various other places in the world. So that's why I really want to have you on. But before we start talking about that, because that's a really big subject, I want to know, first of all, what is the genesis of Ara Oshagan? Where does he come from? I know your grandfather was a writer, your father, Vahan Oshagan. Sure, yeah,
my
everybody.
mother on here, that's
Please.
the genesis.
Of course. I want to know, I want to learn more about your grandfather, your father, Vahan Oshagan, who was a writer, and you, Lebanon, all of that. So wherever you want to start, however you want to start, it's you. So
Yeah, okay, sure. I could start with a little bit of a biographical note, maybe
Sure.
a personal biography note. My father, Vahan Oshagan, as you mentioned, was a writer, as well as my grandfather, Hagop Oshagan, was a writer. Hagop Oshagan was born in the late 1880s in actually Bursa, not quite Western Armenia, but very close to Istanbul. And he was one of these crazy genius people, where he would read a book and he would remember every word of that book.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah, and and I inherited a very, very, very small part of that genius that he was. He was a writer and then he moved to Istanbul, and he was really involved in cultural and literary life in Istanbul right before the genocide. He was actually one of the people. He was arrested. The 200 or 220
Yes.
intellectuals
Really?
were
Yeah.
arrested.
The intellectuals, the artists. Yes.
Yeah, all the artists and intellectuals in Istanbul.
Yeah.
On April 24th, and he was one of them who was arrested, but then he escaped.
Wow. Okay.
Because he was young, and he was like, he came from a very, very poor family in Bursa. Didn't have a father, and he was he was kind of a villager, and so he was able to get away.
Yeah,
and
and Armenians were second-class citizens at that time too, so no rights, really nothing. So it's very hard to be an Armenian in the Ottoman Empire at that time. So yeah.
Western Armenia was colonized by the Seljuks, and then later the Ottomans. So like 600 years, we were a colonized nation in that space, and we were second-class citizens, and even worse. And there were these attempts to Turkify us for many decades and hundreds of years. And so we were rising, at that time in the late 1800s, early 1900s, Armenians were rising out of that space, and we're recreating the language and culture, and it was this huge revival. And Hagop Oshagan, my grandfather, was part of that revival.
Yes.
And so he escaped, and he hid out in Istanbul, and then he left Istanbul. And then then after the final expulsion of the Armenians from Western Armenia by Ataturk and his army, he settled in he actually went to Bulgaria, where my father was born in Bulgaria, actually.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, he was in Cyprus and Jerusalem.
Okay.
So he was displaced by the genocide, and my father bounced around the Middle East and Europe, from Bulgaria to Jerusalem, to Paris, to different places, and then he settled in Beirut finally. And he also became a writer. My grandfather was a novelist. My father was more of a poet, but they both wrote in Western Armenian, and both made, I think, significant contributions. So
Yes.
to Armenian letters.
Yes. And that's where you come in
So yeah,
afterwards.
so Greg, it's kind of, it's a double-edged sword in a way, right? So
Yeah.
you have this kind of, when you have these kinds of family, it
Yes.
gives you a kind of a momentum, right? Because
Yes.
you were exposed to these things very early, ideas and writing, and
Yes.
and like the commitment they had to literature. You're
Hmm.
kind of exposed to that very early on, but then this they cast a shadow over you, right?
Yes.
So it's
Hmm.
really, really important to find ways to get out from under that shadow, to
Yeah.
become your own person, to be able to walk that line
Yeah.
between accepting that history, that inheritance that they give you in a sense, but also moving beyond it.
Yeah. Did you want to be a writer? Did you want to follow in their footsteps, or was
Actually, I
that
did at the
okay?
beginning.
Okay.
When I was younger, yeah. After
Okay.
school, after I wanted to be a writer, and I wanted to be a writer, and I wanted to write in English because I was also displaced myself from
Yes.
Beirut.
Yeah.
I was displaced like yourself, right? Like
Yes.
so many of our community.
Hmm.
And I was talking about that yesterday. There was a similar kind of revival of Armenian literature and letters and culture in Beirut before that the war there that
Yes.
displaced us, right? So
Yeah.
there's very parallel. There's like this constant kind of echo happening through the last so many years. So because of my displacement from Beirut, my connection to Western Armenian was disrupted actually, because then I
Yes.
got to the United States, and I really came of age here, and so I started writing, and I was writing in English. I thought,
Hmm.
okay, this
Okay.
is maybe a way that I could walk that thin line between being my own self, my own,
Yeah.
trying to figure out my own vision as an artist, but as well as be part of that inheritance, part of
Yeah.
that collection.
May I ask what kind of writing? Is it poetry or novels or,
It was
fiction? What
fiction.
kind
Yeah, it
was it?
was mostly. Yeah, I was
Okay.
trying to do mostly fiction writing
Okay.
and
Yeah.
novels, no fiction. And I didn't quite get to novels. I wrote long pieces, but not
Okay.
quite a novel.
Okay.
But I do have a novel in my head, bouncing around for many years. And one day,
Yeah, eventually, yeah, like all artists, you have a plethora of ideas in your head which you never seem to get to. But
exactly,
yeah,
man. Yeah,
yeah,
you know
but I
that
get
well,
it.
Greg. We need like
Yeah.
three lifetimes, right?
Seriously, even that's not enough, to be honest with you, Ara. It's just there's so much going on that you want to express and you want to say, but unfortunately, it always feels like there's not enough time.
Yeah,
But so, how
exactly.
did you get into arts? Because now you're doing photography, art, and what happened to the writing? I'm sure you're still doing some of that, but how do you get into that? Did you go to
Uh,
school or
Yeah. No, I didn't go to school at all for photography. In fact, I took two classes. One of them was this darkroom class, which just like how to print whatever. And then the other
Okay.
one was this more conceptual class that then I had a disagreement with the professor. And I was like, okay, I'm done with you people
Yeah.
type of thing. No, but what was interesting, I was writing and I for some reason I was writing these really, really short pieces of fiction too. And I wanted a photograph with those pieces of fiction.
Mm.
And I didn't have a camera. I don't know anything about photography. So I asked a friend of mine to take some pictures. And he took some pictures, and I was like, I didn't like those pictures very much. I wanted something different. I don't
Yeah.
know what I wanted. I can't quite remember now.
Yeah.
And I was like, I can do it. I can do this. It's not, what's the big deal type of thing.
Yeah.
Completely naive, sort of diving
Yeah.
into. But
That's
then
the
what was
Lebanese Armenian in you coming out.
yeah, exactly right. That's
I can do
exactly that's
anything attitude. Yeah.
yeah, exactly.
So, you started doing your own photographs, and is that part of your book? Is that when you started your book?
Yeah, so I started several projects right away actually when I so what was interesting was that I started taking pictures, and what I connected to was the process of taking pictures. Not so much the
Ah,
pictures, because at the beginning the pictures were like they weren't any better. Well, they were much worse than my friends' pictures
yeah.
actually. But the process of photography, the way I started taking street photography and documentary photographies, there's a
Yeah.
lot of movement. There's
Yes.
constant movement, constant talking to people, connecting with people, understanding new things, and having visibility into these parts of life that you don't have,
Yeah.
a regular. When you write, you're just sitting, right?
Yes.
Writer, you sit 4 hours, 5 hours, and you just write. There's no movement.
Yeah.
Right? But and I'm a very restless person. I've been very restless from the very young. I wanted to be a soccer player a long time ago because I
Really?
just
Okay.
running. Yeah, I would just constantly
Okay.
run. And so I connected really to that process
Mm.
of photography. And then it took me a while, Greg, to really realize that it's not so much the medium that you use, whether it's writing or photography or music,
Yeah.
or painting, or performance or singing. It's really about what you want to say through that medium.
Yes. Yeah.
Right. And so it took me a while to kind of realize that. I know it's kind of an obvious thing. You go, oh yeah, of
Yeah.
course.
Yeah.
But when everybody has their own sort of history and narrative. And so by the time I came to that, it took me a while to come to that realization.
Yeah.
And
No.
then once I did, I realized, okay, so I don't have to, it's not necessary that I write, that I can photography will speak about the same issues,
Yeah.
can articulate the same kind of issues that I'm really interested in. So
You're still telling the story through images, basically. And
yeah,
these pictures are time capsules too. So depending on when you're shooting them, years from now, people can go back and actually dissect it, not just the foreground, but the background. So if you want to talk a little bit about that, the art of photography and what you learned from there, and how do you keep things fluid, moving, and how do you tell your story through pictures?
yeah, so it's not only it's a time capsule in that sense that it captures a moment of time, right?
Yes.
That's really important, and the photographer at that point becomes like a witness to what they're
Yes.
doing, to
Perfect.
what they're
Yeah.
looking at,
Yeah.
right? So and that witnessing is really one of the most critical things
Yeah.
in photography. That is a very different kind of process than other art forms, because you are you're right there.
Mhm.
You're in that reality. You're in that space. You're with those people, with those streets, with those
Yeah.
spaces,
Yeah.
right? So um, the work becomes very much about sight. At least for
Yes.
my work, right? I'm talking about my work. People do all kinds of photography, right? The work becomes about sight and about space and
Yes.
people in that space. So you're kind of in that, you become witness to that.
Yeah.
Um, and to me, the kind of work that I wanted to create was, like you're saying, a lot of movement, because it is diasporic. So
Yes.
diaspora to me is very much multi-dimensional, multivariant.
Yes.
Our identities are, we're American, we're Armenian, we're Arabic. I had like a semi-French education, so I also have some of that French influence. You probably also do, be right,
Yes.
because Beirut, Lebanon was a French colony, so
Yeah.
that influence.
Multicultural.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and so this kind of, our identity is very fluid, and we're
Yeah.
constantly going from one to the other. Sometimes they're in contention,
Yes.
sometimes, mostly for me anyway, they're more in harmony. And I think that they exist simultaneously in us. It isn't that, oh, I'm more Armenian, less American,
Yes.
more
Yeah.
Arabic, but
Yeah.
they all at certain points in time exist completely, 100% you. And
Yeah.
you kind of articulate through your person that not only language, language is
Yeah.
really important, right? But
Mhm.
also the culture and the thinking. It's a way of thinking,
Yeah.
a way of life. One of the things that
It's
I
beyond
realized.
borders, basically. There
Yes,
are no borders, and yep.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, one
Yeah.
of the things that I realized when I went back to Beirut, I was like, oh my God, like I'm like these Lebanese. I'm like that. I don't look like Armenians, yeah, but then I
Yeah.
look like these, the way they speak, the way they move. It's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
Lebanese that way. And I was like,
Yeah.
wow, that connection became very clear to me
Yeah. Yeah.
when I was there.
You easily integrate into other cultures because you have all of that within you. It's but it's also part of the Armenian culture too. Being displaced so many places, the diaspora, you integrate with other cultures and you learn from them and you give some of your culture to them and hopefully it intermingles and becomes something beautiful. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
and so that kind of diasporic flux and the multi-dimensionality of identity is kind of what I try to articulate through my photographs. So
yes,
as you notice, like there's a lot of movement, there's like layering in
yes,
a lot of my photographs, foreground, background, ambiguity. So our
yeah,
because we have so many identities in a way,
yeah,
there's a little bit of ambiguity what our identity is. There's no
yes,
single thing that you can
yeah,
point to. And so my photographs also kind of revolved around that idea.
Yeah, yeah. I
Uh,
mean, I ask this question to myself all the time. Where is home for, somebody like me and somebody like you? For example, you were born in Lebanon, but Lebanon isn't really your home, being Armenian. You weren't, born in Armenia. So you don't really feel that connection there. Maybe, I don't know. And now you live in the US. So is this really your home? Being uprooted, your ancestors being uprooted from our ancestral home, where do you really belong? And is there like a connection towards the ancestral home?
yeah.
How do you answer that as an Armenian? I know a lot of Armenians struggle with that.
Yeah,
It's
I think we struggle because we're looking for the singular home, right?
Yes,
So the
yeah,
word home is very singular. They're like,
yeah,
okay, this one place, you belong here and only here,
exactly.
type of
Yeah,
idea,
exactly. Yeah,
or more here than other places.
yeah,
So my thinking is complete opposite for that. I
yes,
have no single home, but I have a home everywhere in a way,
yeah,
right? I
yeah,
belong, as I was saying, multiple cultures, multiple ways of life, and I
yes,
belong to all of them. They're all in me and they all
yeah,
articulate themselves. So there's
yeah,
no singularity.
yeah.
This is what people struggle with.
Yes,
As soon as you get rid of this idea that okay, I need to be one identity,
yes,
and then the world becomes completely
yeah,
diasporic for you in a
yeah.
way.
Because you
I
trap yourself in your own culture, basically.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you can. You're right.
yeah,
And when I go to Armenia, I'm really connected to Armenia. It's
yes,
not, but in a different way than when I
yeah,
go to Beirut, then I'm connected to Beirut. And
yeah,
then when I come to the United States, I'm completely connected in a completely different way. But all of those are what the word home is weird because
yes,
I don't know what it means, right? I'm not
yeah,
sure what that means, but it's for me that's like this multi-place, multicultural, multi-language kind of space. I was just in Morocco and I presented my work about diaspora, Beirut and Armenia, and they had never, like, most of the people there hadn't even heard of Armenia. So
really.
it was revealing for them. And then there was
Still,
this woman, huh? Yeah.
still, yeah, people have a hard
Yeah,
time.
you
I
would
mean,
think. I was like,
eh, you know,
you're not that far from Beirut.
seriously,
You should know something, but it's, we're there's not only are we small and invisible, but there is an active attempt to erase
yes,
us in a way too.
yes,
So that's a different story we can talk
yeah,
about.
yeah,
So, but there was this woman there. It's the Moroccan woman. She had apparently moved to Amsterdam to Holland when she was young, and now she was back in Morocco. She goes, "Oh my God, I don't know when I'm in Morocco, they say you're not Morocco. When I'm in Holland, they say you're not Dutch." She was
yeah,
struggling with
yeah,
this, and I was and I and I think a lot of young people kind of struggle because
yes,
they're looking for this singularity, which doesn't exist for people
yeah,
who are diasporic.
yes,
And then I kind of try to articulate my idea about what it
yeah,
means, that she should embrace both of them, all of
yeah,
them at the same time, try to belong to one
yeah.
place.
I mean, again, it all goes back to this idea of borders and culture, and all these things are very rigid and they put you in a box. That's why your show that you're having at the Armenian Museum in Watertown, Disrupted Borders, that's such
Mhm.
a prolific title. That
Mhm.
can go in so many ways. Yeah, your borders are disrupted. It's such a deep title that you can
Yeah,
dissect it in so many ways,
yeah, it's
Uh,
many, many, many layers, right?
yes, yeah, yeah. And instead of, just saying, yeah, I'm a citizen of the world, it's such a simple thing to say because you're on this one globe. Everybody could go wherever they want to. That's how it should be. But as humans, we tend to always put borders and lines, and you can't go here, you can't go there. And that's not in the human psyche. We're always exploring to do more and go beyond our who we
Very
are.
true. Yeah, very
So,
true. Yeah.
again, that's why, your work is very interesting and very important right now, especially with everything is going on, like I said. But I want to talk a little bit about traces of identity, fatherland, displaced, all
Uh-huh.
these books that you wrote, and one of them you wrote with your father. I would love to know the story about that because it connects to Artsakh and
Um,
all of that. So, where would you want to talk?
yeah.
Yeah, it's
So
just so much, Ara. You've done so much. There's so much going on. I don't know where to start. So,
yeah. Oh no, that's a good place to start. So that was like one of the first projects that I did, was actually photographing the Armenian diaspora in Los Angeles, which is Traces of Identity, and
yes,
then I photographed in Artsakh, FatherLand, and then the last piece because it's for me it's a trilogy, three works that, and there was Beirut where I was born,
Yeah.
and so this trilogy kind of for me speaks about being diasporic, but it also includes the homeland,
Yeah.
Artsakh, because for us, right, in our imaginations, when you're born and grow up with diaspora, the homeland is always there, whether
Yes.
you've been there or not, right?
Yeah.
We didn't go to
Yeah.
first time I went was like 1999.
Yeah.
I was 30 some years old, right?
Yeah.
But that homeland was always there, always in
Yes.
our imagination, always on the horizon, always thinking about it, right? Even
Yeah.
when it was cut off for us during Soviet times,
Yeah.
right? And so Fatherland was a really, really significant
Yeah.
project for me because I did it with my father, right? So
Yes. Yeah.
that also has multiple kind of meanings that just the title itself, because my father had gone to Artsakh in the 90s, after Artsakh was liberated by the Armenians, by the indigenous Armenians who'd
Hmm.
been living there for thousands of years, but
Yes.
had been colonized for hundreds of years.
Yeah.
Finally, were able to kind of shake off the colonizers and,
Yeah.
and be free
Yeah.
for a short while, let's
Yeah.
say.
Yeah.
Um,
30
and that's
years.
30 years,
Yeah.
30 years.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And so my father had actually gone there in the late 90s to teach at the University of Stepanakert.
Wow. Excellent.
Literature,
Wow.
yeah, to teach
Yeah.
diasporic literature. And then he had come back, and I was like, and I had just started into photography. I had started photography like a few years ago and was just
Yeah.
getting into it. And we're sitting around one day, I go, let's do a book. Or he said, let's do a book. I can't remember who said it. I said, okay, let's go to Artsakh and do a
It
book.
was
And
your father's idea.
it
Wow.
was I can't remember who, but yeah, maybe it's probably right
Okay.
because he was always
Yeah.
thinking about booking. But
Yes.
and he had taught there, and he had written about Artsakh in the
Yes.
newspapers for many, many, many years. He had this column
Yes.
every week in Asbares, in the Armenian newspaper in Los Angeles. He had a column, and often he would write about Artsakh and his experiences there. So he had a lot of writing already, and we were like, let's do a book. We're like, okay, let's just do a book out of one of these things, which for me became like one of the most significant things that I've done. We traveled together in 1999, and I photographed, and he took all these notes, and then he came back. We came back to the States, and he actually wrote the long essay for our book. And unfortunately, that was the last thing that he wrote.
No.
And he had heart issues, and then he had heart
Mm.
surgery, and then he passed away after that.
You have this connection with him, which is just it's something that not everybody could say that they've done, with their parent, to be in the same type of love of art and to actually get to share that with your culture. And it's so amazing on multi levels, and to spend that time with your father and connect and all that stuff, it's very sweet. Yeah.
No, it was really, really important, a really intense experience for me to do that.
Yeah.
And then the title Fatherland, you're not a father. It's not only that it's a father, but also the work is about land, right?
Yes.
Because
Yeah.
as diasporic, you
Yeah.
go back to the homeland,
Yeah.
especially Artsakh, which has got this 1,000 years the history of people
Yeah.
living there.
Yeah.
The work is about what is my relationship to land, but also together one word, fatherland.
Yes.
You're going back to this
Yeah.
fatherland, this kind of mythical land that you don't
Yeah.
know what it is really.
Yes.
And
You've only
so
seen the history books and, in
yeah,
Armenian history books when you're in Lebanon and, reading about them. Yeah,
yeah,
definitely. Yeah, I
and
get it.
as I was saying, they
Yeah.
exist in your imagination. It's like
Yes. Yeah.
don't it's always there in this
Mhm.
kind of imagine space on the horizons of your consciousness. And
But
so
to actually go see it in person and to touch the land, how did that feel?
I was really connected to it,
Yeah.
really, really connected in a like it's magnetic in a way.
Yes.
Great. It's really strange that way. It's hard to articulate in words.
I totally get it.
Yeah.
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 I
It's
felt
just
the same
magnetic.
way when I
Yeah.
was in Armenia.
Yeah.
Like what 3 weeks, 4 weeks ago, I was there,
Oh, you're
and it
there? Are
was
you
just
serious?
yes,
Oh my
yeah.
God.
For the first time, we actually went there. Yeah, and the best way I can put it, because people keep asking me how was it, and all I can say is it was illuminating. That's the best word I
Really?
could come up with. Just the people, the land. It was just it was illuminating. It was
Yeah,
amazing.
it's
And,
yeah.
to actually come back right after and all this stuff happens right after that, it
So
hurt
you
so
were there
bad.
before. You
I
were
was
there
there
before that
before,
happened.
and there were some
Oh,
rumblings
wow.
of it. And after we flew back, I think it was like a week later, that the whole
Oh, wow.
Artsakh invasion happened. And it was, yeah, it was heart-wrenching. And,
Yeah.
our thoughts are still constantly there. But, once you see it in person and you talk to the people and you see the landscape, it's just, it touches you deeply,
Yeah.
when
Yeah.
that stuff
Yeah.
happens. So,
It's transformative,
yeah,
right?
very much so. Yes,
Yeah.
definitely. So, yeah, Fatherland. So you did that, with your father. The book came out, and
Mhm.
now you have
Mhm.
that legacy that you both have left behind. And after that, Displaced, which was, the one in Lebanon, right?
Yeah, so
Yeah. So,
I did other projects in between, but the third piece of the trilogy was displaced. So in
yeah,
2014, I decided. So after Fatherland was published 2010, and I started going back to Beirut because I've been
yeah.
really wanting to do that for a long time. So from 2014 2018, I photographed in Beirut, mostly Burj Hamid.
Yes.
But are you from Burj Hamid? No, where?
No, actually, I was from Zal'eh.
That's right. You told me that. Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
So mostly Burj but not only because, when I was young, we lived on the west side. We lived in Hamra. We lived in
Mm,
West Beirut.
okay.
And so I returned there also. And it's kind of, there are not that many Armenians left there in West
Yeah.
Beirut right now.
Yeah.
Even though I
Yeah.
had some friends, actually, a friend of mine, my kindergarten classmate, or elementary school classmate, still lives where he used to live about
Really?
4 years
Wow.
ago. Yeah.
That's amazing. Wow.
He just
Okay.
stayed. He just decided to stay despite all the fighting that
Yeah.
happened down there
Yeah.
for like 20 years.
Yeah.
So part of it is in West Beirut, and most of it Burj. Part of it is Anjar because I
Hmm.
really wanted to
Yeah.
see Armenian presence in
Yes.
Lebanon in multiple ways. Um,
Is that when you shot your film? Because I also mentioned you're a filmmaker, but for the happenstance of history. Is that
yeah,
when you did that whole? That was an amazing film. It was only about 4.5 minutes, I think, of
4 minutes.
what.
Yeah,
Yeah, and I gotta say, Ada, I wanted to see more. I'm like, it's not
yeah,
fair that it was only for 4 minutes, But you said
yeah.
so much in that 4 minutes. And the way you shot it too, with the split screens and everything happening kind of all at once, it felt a little claustrophobic. At the same time, it was, there were some happy moments in there,
Mhm.
especially when one of them took out a gun and started shooting in the ceiling.
Yeah, that's
That
crazy.
brought back a lot of memories. And
Yeah.
so, for those listening to this or watching this, if you haven't seen the film, you should go to Ara's webpage and look up, But for the
Yeah.
Happenstance of History. It's a great 4-minute short
Maybe we
film.
can put the
But
link, we
yes,
can put the
definitely.
link
Oh yeah,
in
I'm gonna
the
put all that
YouTube
stuff in the
channel.
bio.
Yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
So do you want to talk a
Uh,
little bit about that, please?
yeah, sure. And so when I went back to Beirut, there were some issues came up for me that that I wanted to really address. For instance, the issue of language, right? As you
Yeah.
know, Western Armenian, because of the genocide, because it's been diasporic for 100 years now, is an endangered language, right?
Yes. Yeah.
So, and it's also our language. It's my language, your language. That's the
Yes.
language we grew up with. And for me, because of my displacement in 1975, because of the Lebanese War, as I was saying a little bit earlier, I lost touch with the language. What
Yeah.
I call my indigenous language is Western
Yes.
Armenian, and I lost touch with it because we also my displacement also a very personal one because my family fell apart when we
Yes.
came to the States, and so I distanced myself for whatever reasons from the language for many years, but then I returned to it, and then when later in my life, but then when I went back to Beirut and I heard this really melodious, beautiful Western Armenian that I hadn't heard for a long time.
Yes.
Spoken in the streets by 12, 10-year-old kids,
Yeah.
I was like, oh my God. And this is such a oasis for the
Yes.
language. And so I really wanted to address that in a
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
And so photography is not about sound. There's no sound in photography. And so
Yeah.
I started doing some video to see what's possible speaking to that. issue, which is a really, really critical issue for me.
Yes.
And so this kind of film idea came out, and it's, as we were saying, it's a 3-channel film,
Yeah.
right? And it's kind of, I did it that way because it's fractured. It's the diasporic. Diaspora is
Yes.
fractured and displaced. So the displacement is in the actual structure of the film itself.
Mm.
And then different things happen in the film that really are about language and sound in that space, but in kind of articulated in an image space, an image format through images.
Yeah.
And there's no narrative, there's no narration. It's just whatever sounds that I recorded there. The relationship between the different parts.
I think that was the beauty of it, because you just kind of put it there, and honestly, it doesn't need like a linear narration. It does really work all together, and you got to see little snippets, little aspects of life, Armenians in Lebanon, in their life, how it is. You saw a little bit of the sadness, a little bit of the happiness, and that split screen between the quietness of the church and then the party going on the left
party
side.
and the gun.
Yeah, it's just that was such an amazing image. And like you see it was like a yin and yang kind of a thing. Yeah.
Especially, as you know, Beirut is that land of contrast, right?
Yes.
There's nowhere on the
Oh
planet
God, yeah.
it's sort of at this exact same moment, same place, these extremes exist together.
Yes.
And that kind of scene for me contained that the slow, mystical, the incense, the hum of the church, and then the party and the gun. Those exist within like a block from each other. Okay, as you know.
And the funny thing is, after the gun goes off, nobody bats an eye, because it's just Tuesday for them. Yeah, it's normal. That's the amazing thing. You couldn't do anything like that here. So, but over there, it's just, we're laughing about it, but there's a tragedy in that people are so desensitized, with weapons and everything, because that's what they've been living with since 1975, and even a little bit further than that. So it's, Beirut has always been in my heart also. And, I have a friend there that I still keep in touch from childhood. And it's tragic, what they're going through also. It's just Armenians just seem to just constantly be in tragedy,
it's like been relentless, this whole 100 years, that
trauma, not even 100 years. It goes all the way back. I mean, Armenians go all the way back to what, 5,000 to 7,000 years, Sumeria, Babylon, all of them. And if you look in our history, which I've been doing recently for a project that I'm on, it's just nonstop conquering of Armenians, or battles, and you're getting them from everywhere. And I guess the part that gives you hope is, after 5,000 years or so, we're still here, whereas Sumeria doesn't exist, Babylon doesn't exist, but Armenians are still here, and we still have somewhat of a homeland, even though they're trying to also wipe that out too. But there's always hope.
Yeah, exactly. And so the future is typically predicated by what happened in the past, right?
Yes.
And so we've been around for 5,000 years. I imagine and I believe that we're still going to be around.
Yes.
We may be going through a really, really, really rough period right now as a nation, as a diaspora, as a country also. But this whole thing, my father tried to address this issue in FatherLand. He begins his big essay with, he lists all these bunch of races and nations who used to be in Karabakh, in that area, over the centuries, but they're no longer there. But they're there, and so there's some mystery, some key, something about our survival. That whatever it is, like, we really need to reach down into that deep now, next couple of generations, to remain.
It's like that saying of Nietzsche, what can't kill you makes you stronger. And, we've kind of literally lived through that, and you mentioned Western Armenian, part of that strength of the language of Western Armenian in Lebanon and Syria might have been because of, the whole sinister act of the genocide. which pushed the Armenians out of their homeland, and which gave that drive for the Armenians to actually really speak Armenian, so it doesn't get lost.
Yeah.
And through that tragedy kind of came that strength of keeping, Western Armenian going.
Well, I mean, and it would have really become that. It's weakened now, right? It's
Yeah.
like all over the world. It's an endangered language.
Yes. Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, in the Western world, it's very difficult. Like here in LA, we have a number of schools,
Yeah.
but and they all teach Armenian, but really nobody graduates from their schools with a kind of literary knowledge of Armenian. So nobody
Yes.
will write
Yeah.
books in Armenian,
Yeah.
even though they will speak. A lot of them will speak fine.
Yeah.
And that's good, but there's no literary production
Yeah.
in that language.
Yeah.
And that literary production was happening in Beirut, before in the 60s, and there was this huge revival, right? I was saying,
Yeah.
60s up to 70s, and the war kind of disrupted that revival also. Or else now, I think Western Armenian would have been a very hugely flourishing language if the wars in Syria and Lebanon hadn't disrupted the cultures and the networks there.
Yeah.
That was really a hard blow for us.
It was. I mean, part of it is also this question might not have an answer, but I often think about this too. Because of the genocide, when they took away all the intellectuals, the artists, the musicians, our culture really suffered bad because of that. And do you think that kind of reverberated throughout, the generations, that we haven't been able to produce as many writers and artists and all these, great writers and thinkers, because we've been pretty much cut at our knee, 100 years ago, and we're still struggling to come back. Do you think that's still a cause of it?
Of course, yeah, 100%. I mean,
Yeah.
100%. When you're displaced as a whole community from your indigenous lands, and your culture is kind of stops, you have to revive it completely from zero.
Yeah.
And as I said, we did it. It took from, let's say, 1920 to 1960. It took 40 years. It took 2 generations to get back up on our feet in that way culturally. And then more wars disrupted that,
Yes.
and so and that's got genocide has got this kind of long multi-generational impact effect on all cultures, on all cultural aspects and literary, artistic dimensions of life.
Yeah. And I just want to also state the fact that Armenians went through that tragedy, but it's also happening in other cultures too. You see it nowadays with displacement and pressure, and it's happening everywhere, which makes no sense. It's 2023 and we still are in that. Well, by we, I don't really mean the people. I mean the rulers of these nations, which seem to be really unhinged, and it's the people who suffer for their lack of morality, or whatever you want to say.
Yeah, I mean, small, weaker nations right now, or populations or communities, are really being targeted in a major way, like the Armenians, the Palestinians right now being targeted by Western powers to try to completely displace 2 million people. It's unbelievable what they're trying to do.
It's a humanitarian crisis at this point.
And it's always, and I'm glad you brought that up, Greg, that you always have to connect your personal experience to a collective experience.
Of course,
global experience,
because it's a human experience.
It's happening all over, and I think we are successful. I am successful as an artist if a Mexican walks in to my exhibition and they connect to it in a way that say this is similar to what's happening to us. Connecting different narratives are really, really important. Different narratives of displacement and dispossession, colonization are really, really important.
Yeah. I mean, I totally understand that. I mean, that's one of the reasons why I started my Mythology and Beyond YouTube channel, is to show people that all these myths, even though they're, different cultures, different names, different faces, they're all telling the same story, whether you're Armenian, you're Persian, you're whatever. It's all the same story, which is the human story. And that's where the connection is. And that's where you start knocking down borders. Now, I know I keep jumping around. So I want to ask you about the Artsakh Scrolls. And I think that's what can you tell us about that? Describe it a little bit. And then, that also came about, I'm assuming, through FatherLand.
Actually, no, that's a little bit of different Genesis. The Artsakh scrolls, with
Yes,
the vertical scrolls or the horizontal ones?
the vertical ones.
The verticals on. All right.
Yeah.
So those came more from a research that I did. You know, my art practice is based a lot on research and history. And so I did a lot of the research and into these Armenian forms that have been actually kind of invisible even to us, which
Yeah.
is this long scroll form.
Yes.
Back in the Middle Ages, um, um, Armenian cleric, not there weren't clerics. There were people who were outside the church would create these scrolls written in classical Armenian,
Yeah.
which was usually commissioned by people to protect them during their travels.
Yes.
So there was this kind of outsider art in the medieval times because they had to do a lot with magical
Yes.
incantations or superstition and things like this, like the evil eye equivalent on a scroll form, right?
I love that. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
it's
didn't know
really,
about, yeah, I didn't know
yeah.
about any of that. And when I was at the museum
Uh-huh.
looking at your work and I saw, and it was such beautifully placed all over. And you can, I mean, if you're in Boston and if you're in the Boston area, you got to go to the Armenian Museum of America because you got to like experience it for yourself. You have them hanging from the ceiling all the way down and you can walk through it.
Yeah.
And it feels like a cleansing kind of a thing.
Oh,
And when
really?
I
That's
saw you,
cool.
yeah, because when I saw you and I asked you, because I didn't have time to read the explanation on the board, because it just captured me, and I beelined it to there. And when I
Uh-huh.
saw you, I asked you, and you said these are kind of like Armenian incantations, and they
Yeah.
they would, it's almost like spells, which captured my imagination because being a fantasy artist, like really, we
Yeah.
had this in our culture. And
Right.
I had no idea. So I'm sorry I cut you off because I'm so
No.
excited to know more about it. But please go
Yeah.
ahead.
Yeah. I mean, and we don't know. I didn't know until very recently because the church has suppressed it very actively,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
And they would destroy it. Like if they found one, they would burn it immediately.
Yeah.
And these things were on paper. They would just immediately burn it. And so there's this kind of outside art form that's been marginalized by
Yeah.
our own community.
Yeah.
Um, and so when I started researching them and I learned about them, I really wanted to kind of connect to that in a way.
Yeah.
And so the fact that were used to protect travelers,
Mm.
right, in the medieval times. And what is diaspora? Right, we've been talking about the diaspora's movement, constant
Yes.
forced or unforced movement, because once you're displaced, you have these different trajectories that you go back. Like I go back to Beirut, you go to
Yeah.
Armenia. There's this constant trajectory of movement
Yes.
in the diaspora, and so I connected that work with that idea. And
Yeah.
so these scrolls are, they're thin, they're like 6 inches or something, and they can go up to like 20-30 feet.
Yes. Yeah.
You roll them up. And so I kept the original classical text, which has
Yes.
the incantations and the things in there, the magical spells are in there. And I replaced the illustrations with my own photos of
Yeah.
diaspora, my
Yeah.
own travels of diaspora.
Yeah.
So I did an image intervention into these scrolls. And so I should say that the scrolls are digital reproductions.
Hmm.
A lot of libraries and different places have created high resolution scans of these scrolls.
Yes.
Not a lot of them. Just actually, it was difficult to find high resolution versions. So I recreate the scroll from these scans, and I do my own image interventions for my own diasporic travels into these scrolls. And the title is that you may return,
Yes. Yeah.
because there's also care in there, right?
Yeah.
So the scrolls will protect you while you're
Yeah.
traveling, so that you may
Yeah.
return safely.
I mean, you made it so personal. It's just
And I
putting
carry it,
yourself in
yeah,
there too.
yeah, it's
Yeah. Yeah.
very to me.
Yeah.
I carry them sometimes with me also when I
Yes.
travel to
Yeah.
protect me.
Well,
But
now you
also,
got me doing it.
yeah,
After I talked to you, I looked into it. I'm like, maybe I should do this too
you
because
should do
it's
it.
so, yeah, there's a certain comfort in it. It's, and you're writing your thoughts down too. It's in a piece of paper. It's tangible. You can hold it and you can
Yeah,
put it in your pocket. It makes, making them into scrolls makes it more tangible too because you just roll them up and you kind of
just
just
roll
put them
them
in
up.
there.
Yeah, you
Yeah,
take
that's
them
it.
with you. Yeah,
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's perfect.
One more thing about that, I just wanted to say, so
Please.
the idea of return is really
Yes.
important, right? So the may return, so it's personal return safely,
Yeah.
but also for me, it's the right of return, right?
Yeah.
We do not have the right of return to Western Armenia, right? We do not, Palestinians do not have the right of return to vast portions of Palestine. Other
Yeah.
people have been displaced, do not have a right of return. So it
Yes.
speaks to this idea, not a return, personal return, but a collective right of
Yes.
return to places that we have been displaced from. So
Yes.
connects back to the issues
Yes.
that are really important for us. So
Yeah, to your homeland, per
yeah,
se. Yeah. And also when you mentioned that the church, when they found it, they would burn it, they would destroy it,
yeah,
which is really tragic because our culture has kind of faced that pre-Christianity. We had all these gods and goddesses and writing and statues. It's not enough that the Roman Empire and all these other empires that used to come through Armenia would even, steal, burn, destroy our ancient writings and heritage. But when Armenians became Christian, unfortunately, in their greater wisdom, they ended up destroying most of that stuff too. Um, so that's where I kind of see the tragedy of like hurting ourselves. Instead of saving it, they felt like they had to destroy the old ways, and in order to make room for the new. So when you told me about the church finding the scrolls and destroying it, it's like, why would you destroy something so beautiful and so meaningful behind it? It just hurt a little more.
well, yeah, I mean, it's important not to be dogmatic in the
Yes,
way they think,
exactly.
right?
Yeah,
And I
yeah,
think we have to fault the church for being dogmatic in the way
yeah,
they, right? Anybody else who's dogmatic in the way they think, in just completely in one way and not seeing the
exactly.
possibilities and the beauty and the value in other things, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So,
So going back to disrupted borders, how did you come up
uh-huh.
with that title? We talked a lot about disrupted borders, but
Yeah,
you put the whole thing together. When did that again? I just love that title. So how'd you come up with
yeah.
it?
So when I do it, I did a lot of work without like a clear plan as to, okay, this is all going to be one work.
Yeah.
I get, I do things that are really important for me. I go to places and then other projects come out of it, like we were talking earlier. I started with photography in Beirut,
Yeah.
but then I made film, I
Yes.
make collage work, I make installation having to do with language, or the past. That's one of the things, collage work. A lot of my collage work started from Beirut. So it is all about borders, right?
Yeah.
Whether you are invisible borders inside you or diaspora, having as a space in a way, in a sense, without borders, but also having to constantly cross borders
Yes.
in these kind of trajectories. But also it's about disruption, right? Because of this history that we've been constantly talking about, personal disruption, collective disruption, displacement. Um, and so when I kind of put all this different works together, that kind of idea of, well, how do you talk about borders? It isn't just,
Yeah.
a border and a border fence, but they're trying to expand on the idea of what a border
Yes.
is. And the work itself, it kind of crosses borders. So because there's all kinds of different, there's collage, there's installation,
Yeah.
there's photography, there's
Exactly.
film.
Yeah.
And so the form, the form itself of the exhibitions, the exhibition's form itself kind of crosses borders, disrupts borders in a way
Yeah.
that typically you don't, typically it's just photography. So it kind of does that
Yeah.
also in shape and in form.
And also your work right now, which is in the museum, those big prints that are on the window that you could see from the outside.
Shushi.
You've
Uh-huh,
yep,
uh-huh, uh-huh.
and you've been using like the background is the illumination writings, and the
Uh-huh.
foreground are images of people.
Yeah.
It's beautifully done, and just the fact that those huge pieces are right at the window. Every time I drive by or I walk by, I
Oh,
see it.
you can
Yeah,
see
of
it.
course. Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
Every time
nice.
I go by, I'm like, hey, that's Ara's work. So it's just, but it
Cool.
captures like people from the outside see it. And I thought it was such a great idea to do it that way. And you're not bound in one space. So how did that come about? Something about doing big pieces of work.
Yeah.
So talk about,
Yeah.
talk about that.
So I really have to credit the museum and Jason,
Yes.
especially Jason Sohigan, for being open to all these different ideas, right?
Yeah.
So that building, I have to say, the museum building is not it used to be a bank, okay?
Yes. Yeah.
And so and when I first walked into it, it's not really a contemporary gallery space because
Mm.
it used to be a bank. It's got a low ceiling, it's got these strange walls, strange kind of impediment, things like that, and it's got these huge windows
Yeah.
that you if there were walls, you could put huge works on them, right?
Yeah.
And so my first idea, the curator and I were working together, was how can we use those windows? Bring that and
Yeah.
there's beautiful light that comes into the
Yes.
window.
Yeah. It
And
illuminates the illumination pages
yeah,
basically, not to
exactly.
be
Yeah,
kind of, yeah.
right.
Yeah.
And there were six of them. And
Yeah.
my Shushi portrait series are six. And
Yes.
she goes, "Hey, I think we can do something." And so that the genesis came from that.
Yeah.
And the fact that I had printed those works and I showed them in the curator. So the curator is Ryan Casey. She's a curator at Stockton University in New Jersey.
Hmm.
That's where the exhibition started on the East Coast. Actually, the first one is in LA, and then this an expanded one is in New Jersey, and then expanded more to one to Boston. And so it was printed on paper.
Yeah.
And I said, I don't think we can paper is not going to work, but I think we can print on fabric and when the light
Yes.
shines through it. And I've done exhibitions like that where I
Yeah.
printed work on fabric and when the light shines through it, it just kind of glows.
Yes. Yeah.
And we're like, Jason, what do you think about
Yeah.
this? They had never put anything in that
Yeah.
windows ever. He goes, oh, yeah, okay, let's try. So
Yeah.
I really have to credit Jason for being
Yes.
open to that. And then so the exhibition becomes site specific because we measured those windows and the new fabric prints were made exactly to fit those windows.
Wow. Okay. So it was custom made. Amazing.
Custom made
Yeah.
for that space.
Yeah.
That's why they look so amazing
Yeah. Yeah.
that way because they're
Yeah.
fit perfectly into that space.
And just the idea that it's fabric too. I mean, that was just amazing because you could see the fibers through the fabric and it connects to, the paper, which is
Yeah,
illumination. It's just,
the
it works on
illumination.
so many multi levels. And like I said, it makes the exhibit piece not just in the room, but outside of it. People on the
Right. So it
outside see
becomes
it. So
yeah,
it becomes interactive in a way.
it becomes
Yeah.
public art,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Because
Public art.
it becomes public art because the
Yeah.
public outside the space can see it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And and then that work is really, the museum has collections of Armenian illuminated manuscripts.
Yes. Yeah.
So having the manuscripts there in
Yeah.
that windows connects to their own.
Yeah, it's very fitting. Yeah, and I know recently they've brought some professionals from Armenia to actually work on some of their manuscripts too, also just
Yeah.
to restore them and stuff. Yeah, just amazing looking pieces. So Ara, going back to, you said something about unimagined futures. In your bio, I read it.
Uh-huh.
Could you elaborate a little bit on that?
Sure. Yeah, sure. Actually, what's really interesting is I was thinking I was going to talk about this exact works that we're talking about in the window
Yeah.
speak to this kind of future and it's unimagined. The un is kind of in parentheses, right? So
Yes. Yeah.
it's imagined and not imagined at the same time
Yeah.
in that way. And so this work came about after the 2020 war in Artsakh. Because
Yes.
as you know, FatherLand, I worked many years in Artsakh. I worked a lot in the town of Shushi, and
Mm.
Shushi is kind of this center of that region,
Yes.
cultural and historical center, productive center, very important space, and it really connected to Shushi. So I
Yes.
spent a lot of time in Shushi, and a lot of photos from in FatherLand are from Shushi.
Yeah.
And I returned there to do an exhibition um, in 2012 and did these portraits. And so the portraits in this work are portraits of Shushi residents in 2012.
Mm.
And then
Okay.
2020 we just couldn't imagine that would happen. 2020
Yes.
Azerbaijan attacked and
Yeah.
part of recolonized part of Artsakh and took over, colonized the town of Shushi, right? And so that really deeply affected me because I was really connected to the place and the people there. And
Yeah.
I started thinking about what kind of work I can create in kind of a response to
Yeah.
that colonization. Because now these portraits that I had taken, everybody now is like, they're refugees. They're not
Yes.
there
Yeah.
anymore. So I tried to imagine,
120,000 of them. Yeah.
Yeah, now
Yeah.
120,000. Back
Yeah.
then, it was, I don't know, a few thousand who
Yeah.
had like Shushi and other built towns and villages. Now it's a mass exodus,
Yeah. Yeah.
right? And I wanted to imagine them back to connected to their indigenous history. And those illuminated manuscripts that come from 800, 1,000, 1,200 years ago,
Yeah.
600, it spans a long period of time. To me, besides being religious texts, because they're really pages from our Armenian manuscripts, Bibles, right?
Yes.
Besides the dimension, the religious dimension, their cultural value
Yeah.
express the way of life. They express a history because those
Yeah.
scribes and they wrote
Yeah.
about
The
their life.
language, the language, the letters, the
Yeah,
colors that they used for those
right.
manuscripts. There's a
They,
specific way
they
of doing those. Yeah.
yes. So they speak to a history, an
Yeah.
indigenous history in that space. And so
Yeah.
the idea of that work, imagining how a refugee who's been displaced
Yeah.
can come back together with that, with an art form that it represents that indigenous history, that land. And
Yeah.
so the Shushi portraits, the portraits of Shushi residents and the illuminated manuscripts came together for me to kind of imagine this future,
Yes.
doing displacement in a way.
A lot of your work is really heavy. It's so how do you deal with that? There's a lot of weight in your work, and I'm sure you take some of that with you, and how can you not? It's painful. How do you deal with that mentally?
Yeah. But yeah, so I step back a lot.
Yeah.
Right. Like this past week, I've been working with genocide survivor videos, right? Working on a video and kind of schizophrenic in the way that
Yeah.
I work on it, and then I have to step back for
Yeah.
2 days and not work on it, and
Yeah.
I come back. So there's this constant back and forth,
Yes.
um, and then or shifting my thinking in different ways, such that I can have that distance from the work.
Yes. Yeah.
There's always that. It isn't that I can always work on it, but when I end up, working and showing the work that I want to show, it becomes kind of, yeah, like you say, heavy and
Yeah.
historically involved
Yeah.
with all these issues that are finally very important for me.
Because people out there who need to understand, as an artist such as you, or any kind of artist, you tend to put a lot of yourself in your work, so it doesn't really become work, it becomes an extension of you. So when you're working on this stuff, it's not like a 9 to 5 job, you're constantly thinking about it, you're dreaming about it, you're living it. And if you're doing a lot of tragic, covering a lot of that, it can seep into your personality. I know this from experience. So,
yeah, of course.
so you have to kind of explain to people out there who don't really know the process of what it is to be an artist. It's not just a typical work, and it's not really work. It's just an extension of you. And
Exactly.
yeah,
Completely an extension of who you
yeah,
are and your own narrative. Like I
yes,
was up at 3 a.m. a couple of days ago working on it,
yeah,
because I just woke up. I was
yeah,
like, I'm gonna
exactly.
work.
Yeah,
I'm gonna work on this.
yeah. Yeah, and I also want to mention it's not just Armenian related topics that you work on. You also did some work, if I'm not mistaken, I might be wrong with this, something about the Korean culture.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
So
Yeah.
yeah,
So right, it's not only Armenian, right? So we've
yes.
been talking about
Yeah.
Armenian, but I have work, for instance, in California
Yeah.
in prisons, and
Yes.
I have work in California that I've done in the Central Valley dealing with displacements actually there, and
Yeah.
and multi generational, with Japanese internment, and then
Yes.
as well as indigenous Californians. So there's a project. So, and then the other one that I've been doing on last few years is in Korea.
Yes.
um, I've been working with a group in Korea, curator specifically,
Wow.
that she invited me over to work, and I've done some work now at the DMZ. And so, as you may know, Korea is the only country in the world that's split in two.
Yes.
That was
Yeah.
because of, after the Second World War split, and so the demilitarized zone is one of the most militarized spaces in the world,
Yeah.
between North and South Korea. And so there's a displacement there, actually, right? People have been displaced from
Yes.
north to south, and
Yeah.
the country has been, the borders, the country has internal borders between itself in a way that I my work kind of addresses that there.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a lot of heavy stuff.
Yeah.
Again,
And
uh,
as I was talking earlier about parallel narratives, like the Korean narrative, they also had colonization by Japan
yes.
and the atrocities at the end of that, at a shorter period of time, maybe 40 years, but very similar to the 600 years of colonization that we had by the
Yeah.
Ottomans.
Hmm.
So there's these
Yeah.
parallel narratives that are, I think, really important to speak about,
Yeah.
and I try to do that with my work, through my Korean work right now.
Yeah, it just goes to show you that this trauma is not just one culture. It's a human trauma.
Yeah,
You know,
exactly.
as humanity, it's just we seem to love causing trauma to one another, which makes no sense. I know, it's insane. But it's
Yeah.
happening. So as far as what's next for Ara Oshagan, what are you working on now? Is that something you can talk about? More books? Uh,
Yes. So yeah, sure. There's lots of things going on. I have my California prison book is going to come out next year.
okay.
I'm also working on a book that of Armenian genocide survivors. One of the
Yes.
very, very first projects that I worked on with my friend Levon Parian, where we
Oh.
did portraits of genocide survivors and recorded their histories. So
Mhm.
that's been 25 years that we're working on. So that book hopefully will come out next year. I think I'm going to do an exhibition in Korea next year, but probably I'm going to go to Armenia. I think it's really important for me
Yes.
to visit now after the Artsakh displacement. I'm in touch with friends that I have there. They've now moved to Armenia. They're in Gumri,
Yeah.
a town in Armenia, and so I'm going to go there. But the next big project that I want to work on, Greg, is to go back to Turkey.
Mm.
Go back to Turkey to
Yeah.
visit Western Armenian lands.
Yes.
And the challenge for me is that I don't want to talk about loss
Hmm.
specifically, because we have so many narratives of people returning to Western Armenia, and I've seen many of these. I'm sure these films or books.
Yes.
It's all about, oh, we had this, we don't have this, well, we lost. Um, I want to speak about the presence that we have there now, which is minimal, but it's still
Yeah.
there. There's definitely a presence
Yeah.
that we have. In Istanbul, we have a thriving community,
Hmm.
right? We have Armenian Muslims in Hamshen region in northern
Armenian Muslims? Really?
Muslims. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. They've been there for like 600 or so years, but they're Muslim.
Really?
Yeah,
Okay.
and they
I
speak they speak a type of Western Armenian.
really I
Yeah.
was yeah, I never
Uh-huh.
had a clue about that. Okay.
Uh-huh.
Because
Have a,
Armenians are so adamant about connecting Armenian to Christianity that you never hear about, other
exactly. It's like the
it's
scrolls. It's like the scrolls. They've
that
been kind
just
of wiped out of our history, but they're a thriving community.
really okay.
Hamshen, look them up. They're called the Hamshen.
Yes. Okay. Hamshan.
Yeah, and so that's a presence. It's an Armenian presence
Wow.
in
Okay.
Turkey, or Western Armenia, and then plus um, there is this little village called Vakıflı in Musadağ area,
Okay.
uh, where those Armenians did not leave. I don't know. I don't know what the exact history is of why they didn't leave during the
Oh,
genocide
okay.
or the final expulsion in 21, 22.
Wow.
Um,
Okay.
but there's a town of Armenians in Vakıflı who are Musadağci, and they speak the Musadağ dialect.
I mean, I often think about, would I go back to Turkey? And because again, my just like yours, my ancestors came from that part, Marash, and everything you read about it doesn't even exist because the government has kind of bulldozed over it, changed the names, Turkified the area. What kind of gives me comfort is I've been listening a lot and watching a lot of Hrant Dink videos.
Oh, really? Oh,
And
yeah.
yeah,
Uh-huh.
so like
It's good.
his way of thinking and how he was approaching it is totally different than what I guess you could say the diasporic Armenians or most Armenians
Definitely.
attack it from for the past 100 years, which is pretty
Yeah.
much yell and scream and go recognize, whereas he was trying a different way, almost like a Gandhi kind of a way,
Yeah.
which I'm really drawn too.
Yeah, his approach, I think, he said we're Turkish and Armenian at the same time.
Yeah.
Right. And he completely accepted those two identities, kind of a diasporic identity almost.
Yeah.
Right, I would say.
Yeah.
And
He didn't consider himself a
diaspora.
diasporan. Yeah, because he said, I'm not diasporan, he said, because this is my land. My ancestors lived here. I am from here. My roots are from here. Yeah, I might be under a Turkish government, but deep down inside, I am an Armenian. And yeah, he accepted both. And he just didn't see the idea of how he could leave those lands because his forefathers are from there.
Yeah.
And yeah, I love that.
No, yeah, the fact that he spoke about being indigenous and being from there and being an Armenian, but also being accepting the fact that he grew up in Turkey and becoming partially Turkish, right? In that sense, and a Turkish citizen, right? And we tend to do this thing in diaspora where we're like, oh, we're only Armenian type of idea, but we're not. We're not only Armenian. We're so many different things, and so his approach. He kind of straddled those two things in a very interesting way. So I don't think is a really important person.
Definitely, yeah. Well, before we end this interview, I really do want to talk about your gallery. I know you own a space with your wife Anahid, ReflectSpace Gallery.
Yeah, ReflectSpace.
Yeah, in Glendale. Could you talk about a little bit about that? What the gallery is about, how that came about, and what do you guys pretty much show there? Because
okay, so we don't own it. It's a city gallery. So
I see. Okay.
In the Glendale, it's in the public library, in the Glendale Central Public Library. So as you know, Greg, like we do demonstrations, Armenians do demonstrations all the time, and especially in Glendale, April 24th, people are out with flags and all kinds of things. So and a lot of people are in Glendale that they still know a little bit of Armenians, but they always ask questions, what's all the issue here with April 24th, whatever. So for many years, the city council, which has been a lot of times major Armenian, wanted to have a space to address these, to explain and what is Armenian history, and not only Armenian history, but the broader history of other kind of atrocities and narratives of that sort. So the public library was renovated in 2017, and this gallery was created inside the public library.
Okay.
To address social justice issues, essentially the Armenian issue and other issues. My wife and I were hired to curate that space, basically.
Excellent. Yeah.
So we only do, and it's very much along the lines of my own work in terms of addressing social justice issues. So through the gallery, we addressed Armenian and the big Korean community here in Glendale, my Korean connection, actually, colonization and DMZ related or other issues, atrocities that Japan did to Korean, especially to women.
Yes.
We've done slavery issues. We've done Japanese internment issue. We've done the Holocaust.
Yeah.
We've done indigenous Native American exhibitions.
Yeah.
So over the last, 5 years now, we've kind of had this kind of inclusive approach to addressing all these narratives and implicitly creating these parallels that we've been talking about, parallels between the slavery narrative, the Korean narrative, the Japanese internment narrative, Armenian narrative. All these things are very similar.
It's interconnected. Yeah, I mean, it's amazing. Social justice issues. It's just it feels like you were born to do this, to bring light to all these atrocities and put it out there. Yeah, and thank you for doing that, and thank you to your wife Anahid. So it was a pleasure talking to you, Ara. I mean, I could talk to you all day. And I know you have things to do. I know, seriously. And before we came on, I was telling you I would have loved to have done this in Western Armenian. So before we head out, is there anything you want to share before we go?
Well, I mean, there's lots more to share, but I want to just say that the visibility issue, I think the fact that we're doing it in English is important because we are right now on the threat of becoming invisible to the world. We are invisible to the world, but becoming really erased. In a significant way. So becoming visible and doing this podcast, I want to commend you for doing it and to speaking about these issues and bringing our issues to visibility, which is really, really important at this point in time. As artists and cultural workers, you're a cultural worker, right? This is what you do. You create culture, you create ideas, you create thoughts. What you're doing, I think, is really, really important, and I commend you.
Well, I can say the same thing to you. And yeah, thank you for doing what you're doing. Thank you for coming on the show and talking about it. So, yeah, if you're around the Boston area, please go check out Ara Oshagan's work at the Armenian Museum of America in Watertown, as well as, you have a website. I'm going to leave all the links in there of your videos and books. And yeah, people should definitely follow you because, like I said, it's just not Armenian issues, it's world issues that you're taking on. So thank you for coming on, Ara. I really do appreciate it. And I hope you all the best. And yeah, thank you.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you all for listening. You can see Ara Oshagan's Disrupted Borders at the Armenian Museum of America in Watertown, Boston. You can also go to his website, check out his books, and his various other projects. If you are joining us on YouTube, please hit that subscribe button, like, and share. And if you are listening to us on your favorite podcast platform, please follow us. Thank you, and until the next episode.